we
That's the beauty of
see,
the unsync system.
yeah, the unsync system, and outside of that, even the job adjustments. I remember like every time there's been an expansion, and I run some of the dungeons from the previous stuff, it feels like those things, everything just melts down. Now, part of that is my gear is at the maximum gear score for that dungeon, but the other part of it is that I feel like things and potencies and all that get adjusted. That I remember just like, yeah, some of these dungeons, I remember Stormblood dungeons specifically running them, and it was just like we were cutting through everything like a hot knife through butter. It was, I was like, well, I wonder if we can beat our time, you know. you
Well,
know
you know what? Maybe that leads into something kind of good because we were talking. You wanted to talk about Dawn Trail difficulty some,
yeah.
and I
In
think,
the real show, Chris texted and said he
yeah.
was Cotton
Oh,
Travis,
okay,
so
we'll hold that off.
he's
Okay,
5, 10 minutes away.
okay, okay, well then I'll hold off for that now. But it's. I think people a lot of time underestimate the level to which gear will let you get away with stuff, like even just an extra hit from the boss or what weakness it does.
Mm,
So I think that there's that element to it. But no, I mean inflation for potencies just happens it's not even that there's a huge I don't think it's even that huge of a shift, but
yeah.
sometimes the difference of like, okay, you went from, I mean, Paladin gets Bulwark in between 6.0 and 6.3. It's still in the same expansion, and you're technically giving it a buff, to say nothing of the actual like attack rotation buff. Or sometimes you're just making things more consistent, right?
Mm-hmm.
So imagine that Ast does the exact amount of potency heal now that it did when it came out in Heavensward. And you remember the amount of bullshit you got to like juggle in Heavensward, right? So just making easier to be consistent. When that happens expansion to expansion, I think that, and then on top of that, when stuff earlier wasn't designed with a job that now exists in mind, right? So what happens when you bring Picto to ARR dungeons? Even if it's balanced for them, it was never, they were never designed with them in mind. So
You're right.
it's just going to be weird, things are going to happen.
Follow-up question from Yukino says, would it be hard for the devs to put new extreme weapon recipes for the newer jobs? Example, add a recipe for a Byaku extreme Pictomancer weapon. What do you think?
I don't think it's hard. Depends. I think it's with 14 in general. I think it's always the question is opportunity cost. It's never a question of like can. Even when Yoshi P says a question of can. As you guys had once say that something could, I forget what it was, but he said something couldn't be done, and then 2 years later they did it. But no, I think it's absolutely possible. I think you also look at their commitment to go back and put Ultimate Weapons versions of stuff for old jobs. I think they're probably more open to it, especially now that they're starting to get through their backlogs of quality of life things they wanted to fix, things like duty support, the visual update. I think we could see more like quality of life things like getting extreme weapons for old jobs.
Yeah.
It's more likely now than ever. I don't know how
especially because the
is.
memory rewrite that occurred, and we see that with the 2-die channel. That's when they announced it. Like the thing that I was like, holy crap, they have put a ton of work behind the scenes to allow for 2 dies. So is it possible? Yes, I think what I would push back on, or I try to reframe just the wording that we would use to think through this, is that I don't think of development as easy or hard. I always think of it as a function of time. And so you take it as a function of time and a function of priority. So how long would it take for them to do that is, I think, a more reasonable expectation. And actually, that would be a question that whenever Yoshi P's asked questions, rather than saying, could you do this or could you do that, asking, how much time do you think it would take for you to do this? Because what that does is it seeds in his brain, he goes and evaluates it and he goes, oh, that would take 6 months to do. And then what that would do is communicate to the entirety of everybody listening to that question. And then they could say, oh, we really want that. That should be a high priority. Or 6 months to do just that. Wow. What about this? Yeah. Could you do this? How much time would it take you to do this instead? And it's like, oh, we could get that done, in 3 months. And you're like, oh, let's do that first.